Hi everyone, it's been a while since I've done a top 10 video, so I thought I would do a quick one just before I go to bed, and you didn't need to know that I was going to bed, but I thought I would do one anyway. Alright, so here we go. This top 10 is top 10 unique comedies. So what I mean by that is this is not like a top 10 best comedies list. This is a top 10 of comedies which are special or unique in some way, shape, or form. It's not really a definitive list, and to be perfectly honest, they could come in any order. And I've already thought of a few that I probably should have put in here. But anyway, this is just for a bit of fun. So let's go through them anyway, and then hopefully you guys can tell me what your favourite unique comedies would be. So again, doesn't necessarily mean that these are the funniest, although I do find them all very funny. Okay, so number 10 is Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy. Now, I've not actually watched this film for a long time, and that's largely because I watched it to death. I used to watch it all the time. Not all the time, but I watched it an awful lot when it first came out. I remember going to the cinema with my mates, and we laughed hysterically at it. And that was just as the whole sort of Will Ferrell thing was kicking off. We'd had Old School, and I think that's what made us want to go and see Anchorman. And we were not disappointed. The thing with Anchorman is that, well, I think Will Ferrell is really funny in a lot of films. I think it's the only film he's done which really which really captures his type of comedy, and I think a lot of that's down to Adam McKay. I would say Mackay, being Scottish, but I think he pronounces it McKay, who's a director, and I think him and Will Ferrell and the rest of the cast, Paul Rudd, Steve Carell, and all the others, Christina Applegate, I think they obviously all improvised a lot, and Adam McKay's films obviously do that. In fact, there's a second film which was edited together from the outtakes, from the stuff that they didn't use, as a sort of parallel movie, which I've always wanted to watch, haven't seen it. I think it's called Wake Up, Ron Burgundy, or something like that. And but yeah, I think the reason why this film's a little bit unique is because it's the one. I say the one film. Old School to me worked, but I think it was a restrained Will Ferrell in that film. I think Anchorman very much is the only Will Ferrell that absolutely works in every level. I loved the sort of 70s newsroom dynamic. This chair, listen to it. Sounds like I'm a flatulent cow. The 70s newsroom, just the ensemble nature of the cast, just everything in it was hilarious. Really made me laugh. Some great cameos in there. I think people ended up getting sick and tired of all the sort of cameos you got on films after this or in and around that period, but I think Anchorman hit just at the right time. And I would like to stress as well, if you get the DVD, listen to the commentary, because the commentary to me is as funny as the film, and it's Will Ferrell and Adam McKay, but they're playing themselves, if you know what I mean. But they hit out with some outrageous stuff. Alright, so that's number 10. Number 9, Shaun of the Dead. I'm a big fan of Spaced, which was the sort of precursor to Shaun of the Dead. In a lot of ways, Shaun of the Dead feels like it was television, so it was a film version of Spaced, which was a TV sort of sitcom in Britain. Absolutely love that series. Simon Pegg, Nick Frost, Edgar Wright, the director, all did a fantastic job with Spaced. And I think again they did it. The thing with Shaun of the Dead, the reason why I think it's a unique comedy is because it's a parody of the zombie genre. So it's meant to be funny, and it is very, very funny, but it's also a really good zombie film. It works as a zombie film, and I think that's what makes it stand out. There are other films which mesh comedy and horror that work. American Werewolf in London comes to mind. As soon as I said that, that's a film I should have had in this list. But Shaun of the Dead, I remember watching it, not really expecting much, because funnily enough, now that I think about it, I watched Spaced after Shaun of the Dead. I didn't watch it before, I watched it after. So I watched Shaun of the Dead, and that made me go back and watch Spaced. That's right, because my friend, I'm having an internal conversation with myself now. My friend Craig was a big fan of Spaced, and he ended up giving me a load of DVDs. So that's Shaun of the Dead. Definitely go and check it out. I think it's a really great zombie film, but it's a very good comedy as well. Number 8, Stir Crazy. Now this is a film starring Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder collaborated in a lot of films. I'm trying to think of them. Silver Streak, Hear No Evil, See No Evil, or See No Evil, Hear No Evil, whichever way around it is. Stir Crazy. I think there was one or two more. But I think Stir Crazy is the only film that Richard Pryor did that really at least comes close to his stand-up in a way, and that just in how funny it is. I mean, it's a very different type of comedy. I mean, Richard Pryor to me is the greatest stand-up comic of all time. I don't think there's any doubt about that. He's the greatest stand-up comic of all time in my mind. And but I think pairing him with Gene Wilder, brilliant move. It's about a couple of guys that end up being framed for a bank robbery that they didn't commit, and it's about their experiences being sent to jail. And I just find it hilarious. I think as much as Richard Pryor is, or what was an absolute genius, Gene Wilder is a genius as well. If you watch his comedy performances in Blazing Saddles, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, if you watch The Producers, you watch his performances, and he's what a comic actor. He's brilliant, and he can play the straight man, and he can also totally flake out in a way that only Gene Wilder can. So I think that Stir Crazy stands out because it's Richard Pryor's best film, really, that I can think of. Although I probably haven't seen all of his films, so I'm sure someone can correct me on that if they think something else is better. It's certainly not Gene Wilder's best film. I would put The Producers and Blazing Saddles before this. And do you know what? Guilty pleasure of mine, Haunted Honeymoon. Always really liked that film. Gene Wilder, go check that out too. Okay, so that was number 8, Stir Crazy. Number 7, we have Comedy of Terrors, which was a United Artists film. It was directed by Jack Tierney, I think, who directed Night of the Demon and Cat People, sort of 20 years earlier. And although this film is a comedy, and it's set in an undertaker's parlour or funeral parlour, and you've got Vincent Price, legend, who is waiting basically for his father-in-law, played by Boris Karloff, who owns the funeral parlour, and Vincent Price is sort of married into that family, and I think he's sort of waiting for Boris Karloff to shuffle off the mortal coil, and basically gets into a lot of debt, so he decides to start killing people so that he has customers as an undertaker. And you have Peter Lorre as his sidekick, and you have Basil Rathbone as this character who they keep thinking they've killed, but he keeps coming back. And it's a farce. It is an absolute farce. There's no doubt about that, and that's the type of film that it is. And I love it. Some fantastic one-liners in this, and it's just great fun. What makes it unique is Boris Karloff, Vincent Price, Peter Lorre, Basil Rathbone. I mean, I don't know if I can really think of a film that has all 4 of those actors in it. Certainly The Raven had Vincent Price, Peter Lorre and Boris Karloff, and I know Basil Rathbone was in the likes of Tales of Terror with Vincent Price, but yeah, and Peter Lorre was in that film as well, actually, but I can't really think of anything where the 4 of them were in it. Again, perhaps correct me if I'm wrong, but just having the 4 of these guys, directed by Jack Tierney, is gold, absolute gold. And I might add, hardly anyone knows about this film. I think it's because people tend to think about Vincent Price's sort of Poe output at that time. But Vincent Price, although he was great at camp horror, he was great at serious horror, but he was also fantastic at comedy, a great sense of comedy. Peter Lorre as well, Boris Karloff, they all did. Alright, so that's number 7, Comedy of Terrors. Alright, number 6, Big Trouble in Little China. Don't switch off the video. Um, Many of you will know Big Trouble in Little China is my favourite John Carpenter film. I don't think it's necessarily his best, but it's certainly my favourite. I think The Thing is probably his masterpiece. But Big Trouble in Little China is hilarious. Yeah, it's an action adventure film, but the lead character, Jack Burton, played by Kurt Russell, is always so out of his depth. The concept behind the film is having a hero and the sidekick, where the sidekick is really the hero and the hero is really the sidekick. You know, that's the sort of dynamic that it plays with. And unfortunately, it failed at the box office at the time because people thought they were getting like Rambo or another action hero. But instead, they got Jack Burton, who always comes good in the end, but he's always out of his element and he's a bit of an idiot in a lot of ways, but just fantastic, absolutely fantastic. Hilarious film, action, adventures at Eastern, it's a Western, it's got its fantasy, comedy, it's got everything in there. One of my favourite films of all time, and Kurt Russell in it's just absolutely immense. But I think it's unusual because of, I can't really think of anything else. Buckaroo Banzai, some people talk about being a similar film to Big Trouble in Little China. I can't really think of anything else that's actually the same as it, and that's why it's really unique. The setting, the whole Oriental mythology, which is in the film, all of that just patched together with Carpenter magic in there. It's an absolute gem. Can you tell I haven't prepared for this video? Our number 5, After Hours, which is a Martin Scorsese film from the 1980s. It's a film which many people absolutely forget about. It was really seen as a sort of blip on Martin Scorsese's filmography. I happen to think it's a phenomenal film. It's about a guy played by Griffin Dunne, who, again from American Werewolf from London, who agrees to meets this girl, and then he says he'll sort of go out and meet her later on that night, and he's this sort of like normal sort of office worker, and it's about how he gets himself all dressed out and he goes to travel across the city to meet this girl and find her, and the number of terrible things which occur or happen to him, it's unbelievable. He gets blamed for robbing houses in a neighbourhood. He meets all sorts of twisted characters. Everything that happens to him is unbelievable, but it's so funny. It's definitely a black comedy. Funnily enough, and it's probably a story I've told if I've mentioned this film before, and I think I have mentioned it in another video, which is that there was a game called Leisure Suit Larry when I was a kid that all the kids sort of played because it was a bit rude, and Griffin Dunne is dressed in the white suit and looks just like that character from that video game. And I was at a friend's staying over, and we flicked over onto it and we watched like the last half of the film. That's the first time I'd watched any of it, and I always remember watching it and we thought it's a Leisure Suit Larry film. Not a very interesting story, but later on I think we realised that Leisure Suit Larry had been influenced by After Hours. But Martin Scorsese's one of the greatest directors of all time. I don't think there's any doubt of that. And After Hours is one of his forgotten films, and you should absolutely check it out. And it's unique because I think it's pretty unique on Martin Scorsese's filmography, and there's not much really like it. Okay, number 4, Evil Dead 2. Not really it is a horror film in that it has the guise of a horror film, but it's very much a slapstick comedy. That's what the film is. It's just a roller coaster ride. You get the slapstick element, but you also have a lot of funny lines, especially one-liners. Bruce Campbell's just fantastic, and the whole film actually relies on Bruce Campbell's slapstick comedic ability, physical ability to do the comedy. In fact, I think if someone said to me this is one of the greatest examples of physical comedy, I would definitely agree with that. Evil Dead 2 has everything, absolutely everything. It's Just such an enjoyable film, but it is very peculiar in that it's a sequel to a film, Evil Dead, but really it's kind of the first 20 minutes of it is a remake of the original Evil Dead. The rest of it's like a sequel, but it's really a comedy, even though the original was more out and out horror. And honourable mention to the third film, Army of Darkness, which a lot of people don't like. I really like Army of Darkness. I think it goes all out comedy, but I enjoy it. But Evil Dead 2 is just a phenomenal film, and it is arguably one of the best horror films ever made, even though really at its heart it's a comedy. Alright, number 3, Night at the Opera. This is a Marx Brothers film. I was brought up largely on films from like the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. So growing up, and I've sort of realised this talking to other people of sort of my age, that I mean many people who won't even watch a film that's in black and white. I encounter that a lot, and I can't understand it. But there seems to be this idea, they weren't exposed to like black and white cinematography or films or anything like that. They were only exposed to films that were out when they were kids or just before and since. I can never understand that, because some of the greatest films ever made were made in those eras. But I was brought up on like Cary Grant films, Jimmy Stewart, John Wayne, a lot of Alfred Hitchcock's movies, all the way through, and but especially Marx Brothers. When I was a kid, the Marx Brothers were phenomenal to me. I just thought they were the funniest, absolutely the funniest thing I'd ever seen. And I'm not really that convinced that I've watched Monty Python. Maybe comes close, but really for verbal comedy, the Marx Brothers just had it. They just had it. Great writing, but I think there were ad libs in there as well, and the dynamic between all the brothers, especially like when I was a kid, Harpo was always my favourite because he was the physical comedy, and make no mistake, a brilliant physical comedian. But as I got older, I realised how amazing Chico and especially Groucho were, and they were all equally great, but just great at different things. But Night of the Opera is this sort of story about it's like a sort of farce. It's always a farce where you've got well-to-do people who pick up on this opera singer and then try to take him. There's like a large section of the film that's all about stowaways, but to be honest, I don't even need to tell you the plot, because the plot's always secondary in a Marx Brothers film. And while there are Marx Brothers films which are of lesser quality, I think all of them are hilarious, and this I think is probably the best. And I think it's unique because it's the best of the Marx Brothers films, and I don't think any comedy group has ever quite equalled the comedy that's in this film, with the exception of one which I'm going to mention shortly. Okay, number 2 is Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters. Can you tell I like it? This was my favourite film growing up as a kid. Had all the toys, still do have many of the toys. I've got the firehouse and all that, which is quite rare apparently, and Ecto, and all the figures. And that was from primarily from like the real Ghostbusters. But I think what makes Ghostbusters so special is that if you think about it, if you really think about it, and if you hear the original ideas for it, it should have been an absolute disaster. But somehow, I think with the cast especially, it works. And I think it's Dan Aykroyd reeled in. I think Dan Aykroyd's got some pretty out there ideas for what Ghostbusters could be, and I love Dan Aykroyd, but I think that sometimes it's good for me to have other people. Maybe that's what Harold Ramis does, is sort of pulls them in a little bit, or Ivan Reitman, the director. I'm kind of half not Ghostbusters 3 to happen, but half wanting it to, just because I loved Ghostbusters so much. And Ghostbusters 2, I think, is a much better film than people give it credit for, but it would be nice for them to do something which is better than that to maybe end the series. But the original Ghostbusters is so peculiar. I mean, it's bizarre. There's nothing which quite has the setting of it, and nothing which quite has the tone of it as well. If you really think about it, what other film has the same sort of tone? There are other films which marry ghosts with comedy, like The Ghostbreakers with Bob Hope, but I don't think there's really anything else that can compare. But I just adore this film, and especially, like, all the actors are fantastic in it, but especially Bill Murray is just a legend. Peter Venkman was always my favourite. I always insisted when we were kids and we used to play as Ghostbusters. I always insisted I was Peter Venkman. My mate Andy always insisted on being Ray, so it was okay. Even though probably in reality, if I really think about it, the role should have been reversed. He should have been Peter, because he was probably a bit more like Peter, and I'm probably a bit more like Ray. You know, a little bit of weight, bit geeky. Never mind. So anyway, that's Ghostbusters. Number 1 is Life of Brian, which is the best of the Monty Python films. It's special or unique because it caused such controversy, and for the reasons that it caused such a controversy, depending on which Python you talk to, some of them believe that it was just a comedy film, while other people do believe it. Others within that group genuinely believe, no, we were satirising religion, and we were showing how silly it can be. I personally think that even if you are a devout Christian, just forget about that, because just watch it. It is on its own a hilarious film. Yes, it does have a message that we can end up following people for absolutely any reason, but it's just every single line in Life of Brian is funny, and I think that's why I put it ahead of Night at the Opera. Although, like I say, when I really think about it, any of these films could have came in a different order, but Life of Brian absolutely has. I just think it's probably one of the funniest films, if not the funniest film I've ever watched. I was talking to someone the other day and they were telling me how they thought it aged terribly and all that, but I'm not convinced. I really love Holy Grail as well. I think there are some things in Holy Grail which I actually find even funnier than Life of Brian. But what makes Life of Brian so classic is that just everything in it is hilarious to me, and it's so quotable, But you try and get away from the cliche of quoting Monty Python. I'm not very cool in the first place, but if I'm going around quoting Monty Python, probably not going to do my street cred very well, very much. So I'm getting tired now, I'm just babbling. But I probably do end up quoting from them anyway. Fuck them. So that's my top 10 unique comedies. Bit of a strange list, bit of higgledy-piggledy, and I apologise for just blabbling on. But what would yours be? Can you think of any comedies that you think are really special, stand out? They don't need to be the funniest comedies of all time, but something that makes them really, really unique within that genre or within other genres. And apart from that, thanks as always for all your comments. I read every single one. I know I'm way behind on replying to all of them, but I will reply to every single one. I know I'm weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks behind, but I will get there in the end. And I really do appreciate everybody's support. So thanks again.